Welcome back to Old School Sports and a very special episode of our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. This, today, New Year's Eve 2023, is our 200th episode of this series. So I can't say that I couldn't have done this without the viewers, because even if I hadn't started this YouTube channel, I probably would still have been playing Out of the Park Baseball 24 with an expansion team in Buffalo. But I can say that the experience would definitely not have been as interesting. This team would not be as good as it is today without the feedback and comments and thoughts and interaction with the viewers. And the journey that we've gone on would have been a lot less rewarding and a lot less interesting. So thank you to all of you who have viewed the channel over this long saga of 200 episodes. We started this franchise back in the spring. And as I mentioned, here in the eastern United States, as I'm taping this episode, it is New Year's Eve day. In some parts of the world, it's already 2024, and we're chugging along with our 200th episode. It's been a real interesting experience, and thank the viewers for their loyalty. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, would appreciate that. We recently started, yesterday to be exact, a Football Manager 2024 series that I'm sure will be a very interesting learning experience for me and hopefully for you. So if you have any interest in that, please take a look at that as well. And wish you, your family, your friends a happy and healthy New Year and a happy and healthy 2024. And as we begin this 200th episode of the history of the Buffalo Wings, we are in first place in the National League East, 5-game lead in the division, and we are competing to be one of the top teams in baseball. We just finished the 2042 amateur draft, went with the shortstop Danny Ferguson in the first round, starting pitcher Doug Bourgeois in the second round, reliever Chris Warrior in the third, a left fielder Jamie Rush in the fourth, and then a highly regarded starting pitcher, David Partita, in the fifth. He dropped that far because his demands were well over slot, and he wasn't really a first-round talent, although he was looking for first-round money, so took advantage of that. Hopefully we'll get these players signed in short order. The only goal in this episode is to get to the midpoint of the season and do our annual mid-season review of where the team stands, and hopefully start thinking through some of the potential additions we might want to make to this team as we get closer to the trade deadline and we try to repeat as World Series champions here in 2042. And we've made it just past the midway point of the season. The Wings are 55-28, 7-3 in our last 10, 6.5 up on the Marlins in the NL East. And with that 55-28 record, we are a game ahead of the Cleveland Guardians and a game and a half ahead of the Los Angeles Dodgers for the best record in baseball at this point. So playing some really good baseball. We're going to give you a little bit of bonus action. Normally I would do the mid-season review right now, but might as well sim another week up into the All-Star break, see where we stand. You can see Deshaun Seifu, don't want to say out of nowhere because he's always been lurking, but up to 34 stolen bases now, only 4 behind Bobby Bethea and Mike Karras, as Seifu attempts to lead the National League in steals for a 15th consecutive season. The number 15 is a big number for us this year in this 200th episode, as we're also pursuing our 15th consecutive playoff appearance, which would break the record that we're currently tied with the Atlanta Braves. So we'll sim ahead another week to the All-Star break and then see where the team stands, where our players stands. Don't want to jinx us, but we've been good with injuries so far. Right now at the major league level, Alejandro Contreras, only 5 days away from hopefully recovering from that plantar fasciitis that's kept him out for the last few weeks. Do have a couple of major injuries among some of our minor league players. Not going to go into big depth right now, but Wally Shanezer, you may remember him. He was a first-round pick, potential two-way player for us a few years ago. Finally got promoted to Double-A this year, but suffered a torn ACL. He's out for 6 months. Gregorio Garola, another potential two-way player we thought about taking in the first round a few years back. Ended up getting him in the second round. He's out with shoulder tendonitis for a couple of weeks. John Wisniewski, pitching prospect who was our top pick, I believe it was just a year ago. 2041, 33rd overall. Ulnar nerve entrapment. His season is over with 4 more months of recovery ahead of him. Pitched just 4 games for us this year and was not that impressive. And then Pat Keating, a guy whose name should be very familiar because we just picked him in the 7th round. He was a guy that was recommended to us by our scout a couple of rounds earlier than that, and we passed. Ended up picking him up in the 7th, and he played 9 games in rookie ball before suffering a torn labrum in his shoulder, and his season has ended as well. And as we close in on the All-Star break and the announcement of the All-Star teams, some good news and some bad news. We've now gotten all of our draftees signed. We ended up making a $5 million offer to the 5th round draft pick pitcher and got him signed, which was positive. Positively also, Alejandro Contreras, our second baseman, is back from his injury. Negatively, a pretty significant injury. Luis Palencia, who played the year for us or started the year for us in AAA, 6-2 with a 3.08 ERA, very effective in AAA, and was certainly going to be in the mix to be a September call-up. Ruptured his UCL. You may remember we signed Palencia to a long but relatively cost-effective extension last offseason. He was a guy who still had minor league options, and with our pitching staff being pretty loaded, wanted to ensure that he was pitching every 5th day in AAA Albany rather than getting a somewhat more sporadic workload at the major league level. So disappointing that we likely won't be seeing him until late next season. Hopefully he can do well, let's say, over the month of August next year in AAA, and then maybe be a call-up to Buffalo in September of 2043. But disappointing that we won't have him as an option to help us out going forward this year. And we have made it to the All-Star break, 59-30 record for the Buffalo Wings, still the best in baseball, and we've got a 6.5 game lead on the Mets, which is the largest lead of any team in their division this year. Taking a look at the NL leaderboards past the midway point. Offensively, nobody among the top 3 players, but Alexis Barajas, our erstwhile ace, is 3rd in the National League with a 2.45 ERA. Floyd Auclair, who we picked up in a big trade right before the start of the season, 3rd in the National League with 9 wins and has a 2.34 ERA, just a few innings pitched away from qualifying for the ERA title, unfortunately, as he does not have the greatest stamina in the world, but still a very effective pitcher for us that we were happy to bring on board. Taking a look before we do our full midseason review at the All-Star teams, let's find out who's going to be an All-Star this year for the Buffalo Wings. Defending World Series champions, best record in baseball. Would hope that we've got a few people on the list. And Alexis Barajas, our ace, one-time Cy Young Award winner back in 2036. Talked about him already with one of the better ERAs in the National League. He's also tied for the team lead with Eau Claire with 9 wins, 9-2, 101 strikeouts, 2.45 ERA, 2.8 WAR on the season. Would expect that Barajas will once again get some votes for the Cy Young Award this year. Looking at the rest of the pitching staff for the All-Star team, our only other All-Star is our closer, Joe Scott. 5-4 record, 24 saves, 50 strikeouts in 39 innings. Has given up 5 home runs this year, which is many as he gave up a year ago. So the ERA has ballooned a bit to 3.69. His Sierra is still a solid 2.84. And nice to see Scott honored as an All-Star for the 4th time in his career. Turning to our position players. And it looks like, once again, going to be a relatively small list of Buffalo position players receiving All-Star honors. And honestly, there's only one of them, Luis Comaduran, who we signed to that extension this offseason. Felt like we couldn't afford to be without his bat, and he has rewarded us by being named an All-Star for a 2nd consecutive season, hitting .291, 13 homers, 40 ribbies. Pretty good at drawing walks with 41 on the year, so his on-base percentage is .386, OPS .879, and he's put up a 147 WRC plus with a 3.0 WAR for us. So 3 All-Stars, not a massive amount, again, for a defending world championship team that's got the best record in baseball, but it is what it is. Taking a look at our team stats here, just past the midway point of the season, our 59-30 record is 3 games better than Pythagorean expectations. You can see it's been a very consistent season for the Buffalo Wings so far, winning percentage over 600 every month of the season, 9-3 thus far in July. So we're having our best month of the season at this point. Rank 5th in the National League in runs scored, and you can see we are in the top handful in most batting categories. One exception would be homers, where we've dipped to 12th. We also are striking out relatively high amount of time, tied for 11th in the National League in that category. 3rd in steals, thanks primarily to Mr. Seifu, and 3rd in the National League in base running. Pitching, once again, excellent. 1st in the National League in runs allowed, and you can see we are in the top handful of teams in the National League in just about every pitching category. 5th in the National League in defensive efficiency, and 1st in zone rating. So excellent pitching plus good defense plus a good offense has added up to the best record in baseball for the Buffalo Wings. So don't think there's any glaring holes that we need to fill. But with all of our draftees signed and a little over $3 million in money available, we will be able to take on some contracts if we so desire over the next 2.5 weeks or so until we get to the trade deadline. Turning first, as we do our midseason review, to our excellent pitching staff. We've already talked about Barajas, named an All-Star again. And we touched on Eau Claire, who we picked up in that trade when we traded away Luis Nava, who had been one of the better prospects in our organization. And he spent most of the year with Toronto, where he's hitting .279, a bit below average offensively, but a solid defensive player. Felt like we had to make that trade, though, when they offered us Eau Claire for him, although we don't love Eau Claire's control. And we don't love his stamina, as I mentioned, even though he's a starting pitcher who's been healthy and has 9 wins on the year, hasn't pitched quite enough innings to qualify for the ERA title. But 119 strikeouts and 84 2/3 innings is certainly nothing to complain about. Has walked 43 batters. We felt like that could be an issue, but we're willing to deal with it with the rest of everything that Mr. Eau Claire brings to the table. And we have, over the course of the first few months of the season, moved him up to be our 2nd guy in our rotation behind Barajas. He had been slotted in as 4th out of respect for the holdovers, Mendoza and Lance, but Claire has certainly performed in a way where he's our number 2 guy now. Alexis Mendoza had been our number 2 guy for the last few years, 8-5 with a 3.25 ERA. A guy who's come up through our farm system, drafted him just over 10 years ago. Probably will be moving on from Mendoza after this year. He's headed into free agency, and he's looking for almost $22 million a year over 9 years. Given that he's 29 years old and he's already fragile physically, and we do have a good crop of starting pitchers still kind of moving through our minor league system, probably will be time to move on from him, but certainly would feel better about moving on from him this offseason if we knew Palencia was going to be ready to potentially fill a spot in the rotation. And unfortunately, with the serious injury he recently suffered, that won't be the case. Jim Lance, 24-year-old, been one of the top prospects in baseball since we picked him in the second round in 2036. 5-4 record. The ERA is ballooned by almost 2 this year to 4.59. Still has struck out more than a batter per inning, and his SIERA of 3.21 isn't that far off of where he was a year ago. Has given up 9 home runs this season as opposed to 8 over the entire year last year, so victimized a little bit more by the long ball this year. And his BABIP is also more than 50 points higher at 340 this year. Look at Lance's profile and still think he's going to be an important pitcher for us. Number 4 starter right now, but likely he'll be moved up to the 3 spot with the likely departure of Mendoza this offseason. And then Eric Barbarito, another guy who's come up through our system, first-round pick in 2033. The 27-year-old, 8-3 with a 2.96 ERA. As a number 5 starter. Don't think you can ask for much better than Barbarito. We've already talked about Joe Scott, who joined Barajas as an all-star this year as our closer. Nate Ruckel, a little bit of a down year for him as our stopper. High-volume guy. He's pitched 78 innings already, but a 2-6 record. He's given up 6 home runs and 78 at-bats, which is not horrible. The BABIP about where it was a year ago, and honestly the SIERA is a little better than it was a year ago. So the fact that his ERA is ballooned by half a run, we'll attribute it likely to a little bit of bad luck. Hopefully we'll get a bit more from Ruckel over the second half of the season. Pat Cheek, the right-hander, picked him up in a trade with Texas about a year and a half ago, getting a shot to be an everyday major leaguer this year, and he's done well, struck out almost a batter an inning, ERA below 4 for us. David Rivera has been a revelation, free agent signing this past offseason to a bargain contract we felt at $1.4 million a year for a solid right-handed reliever. He struck out more than a batter per inning with a 1.79 ERA over 40 1/3 innings pitched. Chris Powers, Rule 5 pick this year, 2.53 ERA in 32 innings of work. Sean Drawn, left-handed middle reliever who we picked up on waivers a couple of years ago, 2.36 ERA in 26 2/3 innings. He's a lefty specialist at times for us. Robbie Farrell moved to a long relief role this year, only 20 1/3 innings pitched. But he's been respectable while doing that. And last but not least, David Espinoza, a guy who's come up through our system, was going to be our 5th starter until we picked up Eau Claire, and he got bounced back to a bullpen role. 2-1 record with a 3.57 ERA over 35 1/3 innings as a left-handed arm out of our bullpen. Pretty happy with our pitching staff overall. Do feel like with some of the trades we made, most notably trading away the experienced reliever Damani Hainsworth right before the start of the season, we could use maybe another really solid reliever for the bullpen to solidify things. I don't hate where we are right now with our bullpen, but if there's a big bullpen arm available, and there generally tends to be as you get closer to the All-Star break, that's probably the only area that we'd think about. Clearly, if there was an ace starter available, always love to add pitching talent at the top of the rotation, but tend to think that the cost in terms of prospects for a player like that will probably be a bit prohibitive for us, given that we do like our rotation very much, even though right at the top end there probably are teams that have better players than us in the 1 hole and the 2 hole. We kind of win ultimately by virtue of our depth and having 3rd, 4th, and 5th starters that are generally a lot better than what most of our competitors are rolling out against us, whether it be the regular season or even the 3rd and 4th starters in a playoff series. So turning to our everyday players, we've been able to keep Mitch Houlihan healthy so far, which is positive. The good defensive catcher hitting 286, does have only 1 homer and 196 at-bats, but has still put up a 98 WRC plus and a 1.3 WAR by virtue of his good defense. So doing a respectable job for us. Walt Miller, his backup, the batting average is just 210. Does have 5 homers and 119 at-bats, and you can see with Miller being our starter against left-handed pitching, and we're also playing him every 3rd day against right-handed pitching in an effort to hopefully keep Houlihan healthier than he's been each of the last 2 seasons, when he ended up suffering significant injuries late summer and missing the playoffs both years. Miller's actually started 36 games for us this year, which is only 2 fewer than a year ago, although admittedly we didn't pick him up until the trade deadline a year ago, and then he took over as our starter when Houlihan was hurt. But looks like he's going to probably start 65 or so games for us this year, which hopefully will help keep Houlihan healthy. Solid defensively, and thanks to the pop in his bat and his ability to draw some walks, he's put up a 108 WRC plus for us. So pleased with the catcher situation. If there's a all-star catcher available, certainly might be something to think about, particularly given that we think we'll be moving on from both Houlihan and Miller after this season, but pretty content with that spot right now. Eric Horst is a guy we brought up as a bench player for us this year. Hit 239 and 46 at-bats. 24-year-old former 3rd-round pick, not a big-time prospect. Basically just a utility player off of the bench for us. Daniel Rojas, big free agent signing from about a year and a half ago, having another solid season, 283 average, 16 homers, 55 ribbies, all add up to a 140 WRC plus and a 2.2 WAR. So the first baseman is a pretty important bat in our lineup. Alejandro Contreras just came back from that injury, hitting 236, 5 homers, 17 ribbies, 97 WRC plus, so close to an average offensive player when everything is put together. 1.2 WAR on the season. Pretty versatile defensive player who's been primarily a second baseman for us this year. At 26 years old now, do kind of fear that low adaptability and work ethic probably will keep him from reaching those last little bits of potential we think there are still to be wrung out from him. And another reason that we picked Ferguson, still a couple of years away from making more than the major league minimum, but could certainly see a guy like Ferguson supplanting Contreras as a starter in the middle infield in the coming years. Mike Whitehead has generally been a backup for us this year, but he still started 52 games because he was an everyday starter when Contreras went down, and he is in the starting lineup against left-handed pitching for us. Hitting 246 with a couple of homers, below average offensively, a little above replacement level overall. Like his glove, like his versatility, but I think that the really good rookie year he had for us when he hit 295 was probably a bit of an aberration given his batting profile. Last but not least, among the infielders, the middle infielders, Jim Andrews starting shortstop, and He's been pretty good for us this year. The batting average just 238, but is a guy who normally hits ninth in the lineup against both right and left-handed pitchers. Somehow has 7 home runs and 54 ribbies for us. So one of the bigger RBI totals from our light-hitting shortstop in a bit of a unique development. 78 WRC plus, so he's still been a below average offensive player overall. 0.5 WAR, solid defensive shortstop for us. We kind of like the ability to mix and match between Contreras, Whitehead, and Andrews at second and short. But clearly, if there was a all-star level player at one of those positions available that we could get as a rental, that would be something for us to consider. And last, but certainly not least, among the infielders, Mr. Deshaun Seifu. All the 38-year-old hopeful future Hall of Famer is doing this year is hitting close to 300, 296 average, which is the best batting average for him potentially in the last 5 years. Has 24 doubles and 6 triples, continues to be an extra base machine. You can see from his scouting report, his speed continues to hold up reasonably well. 35 out of 45 on the base paths this year, so he is getting caught stealing more frequently than he has historically. And as I mentioned, he's not on pace to lead the league in steals at this point, but he's close enough that he could still close that gap over the final couple months of the season. Only 5 behind Bobby Bethea and Mike Karras, who have 40 each to lead the National League, as Mr. Seifu, as we've talked about, attempts to lead the National League in steals for a 15th consecutive year. 13 away from 1,200 steals in his career, and he is now 157 hits away from the 3,000 hit club. So if Mr. Seifu remains healthy, it seems realistic that the new Fordham Flash will be in the 3,000 hit club by about the All-Star break of next year. Moving on to our outfielders, we've already talked a bit about Luis Comadran, who was our lone All-Star this year. Signed him to an extension this past offseason. Does have the opportunity to opt out after next year. We had to include that. But think that the numbers that we have him at until that team option in the potential 5th year of the contract are pretty reasonable. And as we talked about with a 147 WRC plus, Comadran has been a very important cog in our offense this year. Juan Romero, having a definite down year for him. All he's done since we picked him up in a trade with Atlanta in the 2038-2039 offseason is lead our team in homers and ribbies for 3 consecutive seasons. Doesn't seem like there's going to be a 4th year where that happens this year. Batting average down to 243, only 8 homers with 45 ribbies. He's been a below average offensive player. Romero is another guy who is potentially headed to free agency, and he's looking for 7 years at around $15 million a season. It may be time for us to move on from him. So with the fact we're likely moving on from both of our catchers, we're potentially moving on from Romero, we're moving on from a long-time number 2 or number 3 starter in Alexis Mendoza, most likely this offseason. A lot of change potentially coming to Buffalo this coming offseason, where there could be some more significant turnover among important players than we've typically had. So this is kind of the last dance for this crew as we try to repeat. Ishmael Velasco had a brilliant rookie season last year. All he did was win Rookie of the Year, be named an All-Star, win a World Series title with us, and also win the World Series MVP award. We signed him to a long extension after that. Not having quite the season that he did a year ago, but still hitting 287 with 16 doubles, 4 triples, 10 homers, and 11 stolen bases. adds up to a 126 WRC plus and a 2.7 WAR, given his solid outfield defense in center field. So Velasco generally holding up his part of the bargain. Tylen Hotailing made the team as basically the last man out of spring training. Felt like we needed another left-handed bat. Hasn't gotten a ton of playing time, but in the limited action he's gotten is a left-handed pinch hitter for us, an occasional starter. He has hit 288, 19 hits and 66 at-bats, mostly singles, as he's only got 3 doubles and a homer, but still adds up to a 109 WRC plus for us. A competent corner outfielder with a decent bat against right-handed pitching, particularly. Not the worst guy in the world to have as a number 5 outfielder. And then last but not least, Josh Porter back in the starting lineup every day this year. The batting average has dipped to 236. Kind of got to pick and choose his spots a year ago and basically played him primarily against left-handed pitching, where he is very dominant. Has to play every day this year, and it hasn't worked out quite as well. 13 homers and 48 ribbies to go with 17 doubles, though, so he has generated some extra base hits for us. That said, when all is said and done, he's been a league average offensive player with both the 100 OPS plus and WRC plus. Still put up a 2 WAR on the season. He's stolen 15 bases. He's pretty solid defensively, but would hope that he can get that batting average up a bit. Although the platoon advantages he got allowed him to hit 281 a year ago when he was primarily playing against, as I mentioned, left-handed pitching. He still did hit 262 the year before when he was an everyday player for us, and would expect him to hopefully get closer to that. His BABIP this year has only been 305. Hopefully that number will creep up over the second half of the year, and Porter will end up being an important offensive player for us when all is said and done. So that, in a nutshell, is where we stand. Don't feel like there's any glaring holes to fill. As I mentioned, another arm for the bullpen wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. If there's a great catcher available or a great middle infielder with a big-time bat available, those would certainly be interesting things for us to pursue. Before finishing up, we will take a quick look at the trade block just to see who is available for us. If we decide that we are going to try to make a trade, doesn't necessarily need that we need to get someone off the trade block. Our old buddy Shamar Jenneret is available. Wouldn't really solve any of the issues that we outlined, but still a reasonably effective offensive player, closing in on his 38th birthday. Another former member of our team, Arturo Flores, available. Tim Gaglia, a lot of familiar names out there. Don't necessarily see an infielder who's going to be impactful enough. Jackson Holliday, 38 years old, seems like he's always on the trade block. He's wrecked physically. I don't think that's the type of bat that we're looking for. Emmanuel Lantigua, again, I don't think that bat's really any better than the type of bats that we have in our middle infield right now. So I don't know that there's any obvious answers. Catching-wise, Jesus Cadena, like the bat, but the glove doesn't really interest me. Tim Lavielle and Jorge Luna also out there. Lavielle, I don't love the glove. Luna, don't love the bat. Campbell Smithwick, a guy that we flirted in at times in free agency. I don't see where he's an upgrade to even Walt Miller as our backup. Dan Thigpen, maybe a little bit better contact hitter than Miller. Certainly a better contact hitter than Miller with decent defense. Maybe he'd be a small upgrade as our backup catcher, but keep in mind we still have Mr. Ramirez lurking in our organization. and he will likely be being promoted up to AAA probably before I move forward another day. So he is a guy who could certainly potentially help us in the playoffs and September, and also likely will take over as our starting catcher next year. So I don't necessarily love any of the options that are available on the trade market. Again, that doesn't mean that we can't look through other channels than players who are actively being shopped as guys who could help our team. Pitching wise, familiar name, Darnell Polite looks like one of the top guys available. The right-hander certainly could help our bullpen. He's fragile. He wants to be a closer. Is in the final year of his contract, so if we got the Blue Jays to retain a chunk of that, I think that he could ultimately be useful. He was with us back in 2037, where he had a respectable year, 105 ERA plus 99 FIP minus. He's generally been a lot more successful than that since he moved on from our team, and I believe we traded him away. I can't remember what trade it was. Oh, he was in the big trade for Joe Scott. That's right, when we brought the young man who was going to basically take over for Polite as our closer. We included him there, along with the left fielder Alex Fellers, starting pitching prospect Mike Coleman, and second baseman Alan McGrew, who's also retired. So Polite, if we could get him really cheap and they would keep a good chunk of his contract, he could certainly help us. It looks like there's option there. I think the price is a little high for what he is, just at first glance. Don't know that I'm willing to give up a good, solid second baseman prospect or a starting pitching prospect for him. And I'm certainly not going to weaken our major league team to bring him on board. But there's other options besides Polite as well. And it looks like I somehow have clicked over to the OSA ratings from my scout ratings. There's other options out there. Again, I don't feel like we have to do anything, given that we are a win now team. My inclination is to try to improve if there's options out there. Interestingly, Damani Hainsworth, who I mentioned, guy we traded away right before the season started to bring on, most importantly, Willard Vokey when we needed to make a spot on the 26-man roster after the trade for Eau Claire, is available now. He's been fine with the Angels. I guess you could argue that FIP minus of 153 is pretty far from fine. Trying to figure out why that's so bad. I guess he's just gotten incredibly lucky with that 169 BABIP because his whip is very solid. There's the answer right there. Wow. 9 home runs allowed in 25 and 2/3 innings. So that's a little bit of a scary number. I can't imagine they are looking for much at all for Mr. Hainsworth. Yeah, it looks like they'll take a bag of balls for him, essentially. So there might be something to do there. I don't know that Hainsworth is quite high-end enough to be the impact pitcher that we're looking for, but he still could give us one more proven major league caliber arm, which would not be the worst thing in the world, given that bringing up Palencia in September will not be an option for us. So if you've got thoughts on what we should do as we approach the trade deadline, always helpful for me to hear what you're thinking. It's hard to believe it's been 200 episodes if you're still listening and watching at this point. Thanks for your loyalty. Thanks for your viewership. Thanks for your feedback and ideas that many of you have shared in the comment section over the course of this playthrough. And until our next episode, Happy New Year, and hope you have a great day.